The Kelvani shuttle sang as it fell through atmosphere, its crystalline hull vibrating with frequencies that would have shattered human eardrums. Inside, three visitors from Earth sat in seats designed for beings twice their size, their legs dangling like children on adult furniture. Consul Meridian watched them through her compound eyes. She had reviewed their species file 17 times during the journey. Soft skin, no natural armor, no venom glands, no redundant organs. Average lifespan barely exceeding 1 century. They came from a world so violent that 99% of all species that had ever lived there were now extinct. And somehow, these fragile creatures had survived. Lieutenant Dara Okonkwo caught the consul staring. She offered a small nod, but did not smile. Smiling showed teeth, and she had learned that many species interpreted that as a threat display. The woman beside her, Corporal Priya Nair, was already working on a tablet, fingers flying across symbols that made no sense to Kelvani observers. The man on her other side, Sergeant Ramon Delgado, had his eyes closed, apparently sleeping despite falling through an alien sky toward a war zone. The shuttle touched down on Station Valeth with barely a tremor. Consul Meridian rose to her full height, her crystalline skin catching the artificial light and scattering it into rainbows. "Welcome to the front line," she said. "You are the first humans to witness our conflict with the Doroth hegemony. We hope your observations will be educational." Okonkwo noted the pause. The consul did not expect anything from them. The humans were here as a diplomatic gesture, nothing more. A courtesy extended to a young species that had barely learned to leave its own solar system. She could work with low expectations. The station's war room stretched before them like a cathedral built for giants. Holographic displays filled the air with blue light, showing ship positions, supply lines, and casualty projections. Kelvani officers moved between stations with the slow precision of beings who had been doing the same job for decades. Admiral Soreth waited at the central platform. He was old even by Kelvani standards, his crystalline body clouded with age, his movements careful and deliberate. He had commanded this sector for 41 years. Before that, he had served under 3 previous admirals, all of whom had died holding these same positions. "Lieutenant Okonkwo," he said, his voice resonating through translation implants. "I'm told your species has some experience with prolonged conflicts." "We have fought each other for most of our history," Okonkwo replied. "We're trying to stop." The Admiral's eyes shifted colors in what might have been amusement or pity. "And how is that effort progressing?" "Slowly, but we are still trying. That is more than some species manage." Soreth gestured toward the displays. "Our war with the Doroth has continued for 112 of your years. We have held this position for 31 of those years. The Doroth attack every few months. They lose ships. They retreat. They return. Neither side advances." Okonkwo studied the tactical display. The Kelvani defensive line was a masterwork of fortification. Shield generators overlapped in layers. Weapons platforms covered every approach vector. Supply lines ran deep into protected territory. It was by any military standard perfect, and that was the problem. "Why do the Doroth keep attacking the same point?" she asked. Consul Meridian answered before the Admiral could. "It is the only viable approach vector. The nebula creates navigation hazards everywhere else. They have no choice. May I see the full sector charts? Not just the defended regions." The consul's crystalline face shifted into an expression Okonkwo could not read. "Why would you want to see regions that cannot be traveled?" "Because someone decided they cannot be traveled. I would like to know who made that decision and when." Admiral Soreth made a gesture, and the display expanded. Vast stretches of the nebula filled the air around them, marked in red as hazardous or impassable. Okonkwo walked through the hologram, her small human form passing through representations of gas clouds and radiation fields. Ramon had opened his eyes now. He joined her, examining the Doroth attack patterns with the focused attention of someone who had spent years studying how things broke. "They attack the same way every time," he murmured in Spanish, low enough that the translation systems might not catch it. "Same formation. Same timing. Same withdrawal pattern. That is not strategy. That is ritual. Priya looked up from her tablet. I'm downloading their communication intercepts, not the tactical ones. I want to know what they talk about when they're not fighting. Consul Meridian's confusion was visible even across species lines. Why would that matter? Okonkwo turned to face the Kelvani officers. She saw something in their postures that she recognized from her years in peacekeeping missions. The way they stood, the heaviness in their movements, the automatic nature of their work. These were not warriors. These were survivors. They'd been fighting so long, they had forgotten why they started. Admiral Soreth, she said, I would like to request a private meeting with you this evening. I have a proposal. The Admiral studied her for a long moment. She was small, soft, from a species that had barely touched the stars. But something in her eyes reminded him of officers he had known long ago, before the war had ground everyone into the same exhausted shape. Very well, Lieutenant. I will hear your proposal. Okonkwo nodded once. Behind her, Priya was already deep in Dorth communications data, and Ramon was sketching attack patterns on his tablet. They had been here for less than 6 hours, and they were already asking questions no one had thought to ask in over a century. The war was about to change. Admiral Soreth's private chamber held the memories of everyone who had died under his command. Crystallized fragments lined the walls, each one containing the final thoughts of a fallen soldier. 11,462 pieces of crystal. He knew the exact number without counting. Lieutenant Okonkwo stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the dead, and did not flinch. Your species decorates with bones, Soreth said. I have read your cultural files. Skulls on shelves. Preserved remains in glass cases. You understand memory. We understand loss, Okonkwo replied. The two are not always the same thing. The Admiral settled into his seat, his ancient body creaking with the sound of grinding minerals. You said you had a proposal. Speak. Okonkwo pulled up a holographic display from her tablet. It showed the Dorth attack patterns from the last 30 years, compressed into a single image. The lines overlapped so completely they looked like a single drawing repeated thousands of times. This is not military strategy, she said. This is compulsion. The Dorth are not trying to win. They're trying to lose in a way that feels like fighting. Soreth's eyes flickered through several colors. You have been here one day. Our analysts have studied the Dorth for a century. Your analysts are looking at what the Dorth do. I'm asking why they do it. She changed the display. Now it showed the Dorth communication intercepts that Priya had been analyzing through the night. Your intelligence officers focus on tactical communications, troop movements, supply logistics. But Corporal Nair has been listening to everything else. Personal messages, informal channels, the things soldiers say when they think no one important is listening. The Admiral leaned forward slightly. And what do they say? They talk about something called the homeworld silence, a grief that has no end, a loss so complete that war became the only sound loud enough to drown it out. Soreth was quiet for a long moment. Outside his chamber, the station continued its endless operations. Ships launched. Shields hummed. Soldiers reported for duties they had performed 10,000 times before. We know nothing of Dorth internal affairs, he finally said. They do not share. They do not negotiate. They attack, and we defend. Then perhaps it is time to learn. Okonkwo spent the next 12 hours doing things that made no sense to her Kelvani observers. She requested debris samples from destroyed Dorth vessels, not for weapons analysis, but to study the personal items soldiers carried. Ramon sorted through fragments of what might have been photographs, religious tokens, pieces of fabric with no military purpose. Priya intercepted more communications. She was not looking for battle plans. She was listening for songs, stories, jokes, the small human details that every species developed to make existence bearable. Consul Meridian watched them work with growing frustration. I do not understand, she finally admitted. You have been given access to our entire tactical database, our weapons specifications, our defensive layouts. You ignore all of it to study trinkets and gossip. Okonkwo looked up from a fragment of Dorth material that might have been a child's drawing preserved in some kind of resin and carried into battle. Consul, what do you want a war? You destroy your enemy's capacity to fight. You secure territory. You demonstrate superior force until they surrender or are eliminated. And has that worked? Meridian's silence was answer enough. There's another way to end a war, Okonkwo continued. You find what your enemy wants more than victory. Then you offer it to them. The Dorith want conquest. They want our territory. They want our destruction. Do they? Or is that simply what they have been doing for so long that no one remembers another option? That evening, Priya presented her findings. The patterns in Dorith communication were unmistakable once you knew what to look for. References to a catastrophe. Morning rituals performed in secret. A date marked every year with communications blackouts across entire fleets. 53 years ago, something terrible had happened to the Dorith homeworld. Something they never spoke of publicly. Something that had shattered them so completely that war became the only identity they had left. They are not an invasion force, Okonkwo told Admiral Sorith. They are refugees who have forgotten how to stop running. The Admiral stood before his wall of crystallized memories. 11,000 soldiers who had died holding a line against an enemy that might not have been an enemy at all. If this is true, he said slowly, then we have been fighting the wrong war for half a century. You have been fighting the only war anyone offered you. But there might be another option. Okonkwo outlined her plan. A single ship, a small crew, a mission into Dorith territory carrying not weapons, but something far more dangerous. Understanding. Sorith listened. When she finished, he did not respond immediately. He walked along his wall of memories, touching each crystal with the reverence of a priest at prayer. You are asking me to gamble everything on the word of 3 humans who have been here for 2 days. I am asking you to consider that 112 years of the alternative has not worked. The Admiral turned to face her. In the crystal light, his ancient form seemed almost young. I will consider your proposal, Lieutenant. Return in the morning. Okonkwo nodded and left him alone with his dead. Behind her, the fragments of a Dorith child's drawing caught the light and scattered it into colors that meant nothing to Kelvani eyes, but everything to a species that had lost their children along with their world. A recovered Dorith emergency beacon sat in the middle of the analysis room, its message playing on loop. The voice that came through was broken with static and something else. Something that sounded like weeping, though no Kelvani had ever confirmed whether the Dorith could weep. Priya had found it buried in decades of archived intercepts. No one had thought it important. Just another damaged beacon from a destroyed ship, its final transmission corrupted beyond military usefulness. But Priya was not listening for military usefulness. The voice spoke of home, of children who would never grow old, of sunrises that would never come again. It spoke of a star that had betrayed its children, expanding without warning, consuming everything in fire and radiation. It spoke of evacuation ships that arrived too late and rescue missions that found nothing but ash. 53 years ago, the Dorith homeworld had died. They never told anyone, Okonkwo said quietly. They carried this for half a century and never spoke of it. Ramon stood at the window, looking out at the endless defensive installations that surrounded Station Valeth. Pride, he said, or shame. Sometimes they are the same thing. Consul Meridian had joined them for this session, her skepticism slowly giving way to something else. If this is true, why continue fighting? If they have lost everything, why not seek peace? Because peace requires admitting the loss, Okonkwo replied. War lets you pretend you still have something worth fighting for. She turned to face the Kelvani diplomat directly. Your people have been defending against Dorith attacks for over a century. In all that time, did anyone ever ask them what they actually wanted? Meridian's crystalline features shifted through several expressions. They wanted our territory, our resources, our submission. Did they say that? Or did everyone simply assume it? The silence that followed was its own answer. Admiral Sorith arrived an hour later. He had not slept, and it showed in the clouded patterns of his crystalline skin. But there was something new in his bearing, something that might have been hope, though he was clearly afraid to name it. I have reviewed your analysis, he said, and I have consulted our oldest records. There are references to a Dorith catastrophe in communications from that period. We dismissed them as propaganda, deception to make us lower our guard. And did you ever lower your guard? No. Then the deception failed, which means it might not have been deception at all. Sorith moved to the beacon, listening to the looping message. The grief in that voice was unmistakable, even across species lines. Pain was a universal language. What would you propose? He asked. Okonkwo had been waiting for this question. The Dorith have been fighting because they have nothing else. Their homeworld is gone. Their culture is shattered. War gives them purpose and structure and a reason to wake up each morning. You cannot replace a homeworld. No, but you can offer a future. She pulled up a map of the sector. Beyond the contested territory, beyond the defensive lines, there were star systems that neither side had bothered to claim. Empty worlds with no strategic value, ignored for decades while both civilizations poured their resources into a stalemate. 3 systems, Okonkwo said, habitable but unclaimed. The Kelvani have no use for them, but the Dorith might. Consul Meridian made a sound of disbelief. You want us to give territory to our enemies? I want you to give refugees a home. There is a difference. They have killed 11,000 of our people on this station alone. And how many have you killed of theirs? Meridian had no answer. Ramon spoke up from his position by the window. We had wars like this on Earth. Centuries of fighting between nations that had forgotten why they started. The only way to end them was to give people something better to do than kill each other. And did it work? Sorith asked. Sometimes, when both sides were tired enough to try. Okonkwo stepped closer to the Admiral. I'm not asking you to forgive the Dorith. I'm not asking you to forget your dead. I'm asking you to consider that they might be tired too. That after 53 years of carrying a grief, they cannot speak of fighting a war they cannot win. They might want a way out that does not feel like surrender. Sorith looked at the wall of crystal memories he carried everywhere. 11,000 names. 11,000 stories cut short. If we offer them worlds and they refuse, we will have shown weakness. The attacks will intensify. Perhaps. Or perhaps they will see that someone finally noticed they were drowning. The Admiral was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of a century. You want to take a ship into Dorith territory? To speak with their High Warlord directly? Yes. No Kelvani diplomat has survived such a meeting in 70 years. I am not Kelvani. Sorith studied her. Small, soft, from a species that should not have survived its own homeworld. And yet here she was, proposing something no one had dared suggest in 100 years of war. I will give you 1 frigate, he said. Minimal crew. If you die, we lose nothing. If you succeed, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Okonkwo nodded. We leave at first light. Behind her, the emergency beacon continued its endless loop. A voice from a dead world, speaking of children and sunrises and everything the Dorith had lost. Perhaps it was time to offer them something new. The Kelvani frigate Silent Promise drifted through the darkness between stars, its running lights dimmed, its weapons powered down. Behind it, the safety of defended space grew smaller with each passing hour. Ahead, only enemy territory and the unknown. Consul Meridian stood at the navigation console, her crystalline hands trembling slightly as she monitored their approach vector. She had insisted on coming. If the humans were going to die attempting this foolishness, someone needed to witness it for the historical record. She was beginning to regret that decision. Lieutenant Okonkwo sat in the captain's chair, far too small for a vessel designed for Kelvani officers, but she had found a way to make it work. Her eyes never left the main view screen, watching the swirl of nebula gas as they pushed deeper into Dorith-controlled space. Are you afraid? Meridian asked. Yes, Okonkwo replied without hesitation. Fear keeps you sharp. The moment you stop being afraid is the moment you make stupid mistakes. Ramon was in the engine room, running checks on systems that might need to perform emergency maneuvers at any moment. Priya had taken over the communication station, broadcasting a signal that made Meridian's skin crawl every time she heard it. the Dorith morning frequency, a wavelength that had not been used since before the war. The sound of a civilization grieving its dead. "We are entering sensor range of Dorith patrol routes," Priya announced. "If they are watching, they know we are here." They waited. The nebula swirled around them in colors that human eyes could barely process. Radiation pulsed in waves that the silent promises shields absorbed without complaint. Somewhere in this vast darkness, an entire war machine was watching them approach. The first contact came without warning. 3 Dorith interceptors dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly ahead, their weapons charging, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to vaporize the frigate in seconds. Meridian's hands flew to the defensive controls before she remembered they had agreed to leave them offline. "Hold," Okonkwo said calmly. "They are targeting us." "Hold." The Dorith ships held position. Their weapons stayed charged but did not fire. They were waiting. Priya switched the morning frequency to direct transmission, aiming it at the lead interceptor. Then she added a voice channel and looked at Okonkwo. The lieutenant took a breath and spoke words she had practiced 100 times during the journey. "We know about Gareth 3. We know what you lost. We come to speak, not fight." Static filled the channel. The Dorith ships did not move. "I repeat, we know about your homeworld. We know of the silence. We come with words, not weapons." More static. Then, slowly, the lead interceptor's weapons began to power down. A response came through in broken standard, the Dorith language filters struggling with a human communication protocol they had never encountered. "You speak of things that are forbidden. How do you know these words?" "Because grief leaves traces," Okonkwo replied. "Even when you try to hide it. Even when you bury it under 100 years of war." Silence. Then follow. The interceptors pivoted and began moving deeper into Dorith space. The silent promise followed, a single fragile vessel surrounded by ships that could destroy it without effort. They traveled for 6 hours. The Dorith did not speak again. Meridian spent the time composing messages to her family, certain she would never have the chance to send them. Then they saw it. The Dorith command vessel emerged from the nebula like a monster rising from the deep. It was the size of a small moon, its hull scarred from decades of combat, its weapons arrays stretching in every direction like the spines of some ancient predator. This was the flagship of High Warlord Grenthar. This was where Dorith military might have been directed for 80 years. And somewhere inside, their fate would be decided. A docking bay opened in the command vessel's side, swallowing the silent promise hole. The frigate settled onto a landing pad, surrounded by Dorith soldiers in full combat armor. Each one stood twice as tall as the largest human, their bodies covered in natural plating that could stop standard weapons fire. Okonkwo stood. "Time to go." "This is suicide," Meridian whispered. "Possibly, but we knew that when we left." Ramon joined them at the airlock, his expression calm despite everything. Priya followed, her tablet tucked under her arm, still recording everything for analysis that might never happen. The airlock opened. Dorith air was thick and heavy, carrying scents that human noses could not identify. The soldiers outside did not move as the 4 visitors descended the ramp, but their eyes tracked every movement. An officer approached. His armor was different from the others, marked with symbols that might have been rank insignia or religious significance. "The High Warlord will see you," he rumbled, his voice vibrating through the deck plates. "If you waste his time, you will die. If you speak falsehood, you will die. If you show disrespect, you will die." Okonkwo nodded. Understood. The officer studied her for a long moment. She was tiny, soft, without armor or weapons or any visible means of defense. And yet she stood before him without trembling. "What are you?" he asked. "Human. I have never heard of your species." "You will." The officer made a sound that might have been laughter or threat, then turned and began walking. The humans followed, with Meridian bringing up the rear, her crystalline body reflecting the harsh lights of a warship that had never known peace. Somewhere ahead, the most feared military commander in the galaxy was waiting, and 3 soft, fragile humans were walking straight toward him. The corridors of the Dorith command vessel were built for giants. Each doorway stood 4 meters tall. Each step required the humans to half-jog to keep pace with their escort. The walls were bare metal, scarred and dented, showing the marks of 100 boarding actions and internal conflicts. But Okonkwo noticed other things. Scratches in the metal that formed patterns. Small alcoves where makeshift shrines had been erected and then hastily hidden. Symbols carved into corners where officers might not look. The Dorith were not supposed to remember their old ways. Their culture had been swallowed by war. But somewhere in secret, they were trying to hold on to something. High Warlord Grinther waited in a chamber at the ship's core. It was not a throne room or a command center. It was a memorial. The walls were covered with names. Millions of names, carved in script so small that even Dorith eyes would need a strain to read them. They spiraled from floor to ceiling, covering every surface, leaving no space untouched. Grinther himself sat at the center of this monument to the dead. He was ancient, his armored body fused with technology that had kept him alive far beyond natural lifespan. His eyes burned with a light that might have been fury or madness or something else entirely. "You should not be here," he rumbled, his voice shaking the floor beneath their feet. Okonkwo stepped forward. Meridian grabbed her arm, trying to hold her back, but she gently shook off the grip. "High Warlord, I am Lieutenant Dara Okonkwo of Earth. I have come to speak with you about ending this war." Grinther's laugh was like stones grinding together. "Others have come with such words. Their bones decorate my hall. Why should you be different? Because I'm not asking you to surrender. I'm not asking you to admit defeat. I'm asking you to consider that you have already won." The chamber fell silent. Even the ever-present hum of the ship's engines seemed to fade. "One." Grinther leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the floor. "We have lost every major engagement for 30 years. We have gained no territory. We have achieved nothing. You have survived." Okonkwo gestured at the walls of names surrounding them. 53 years ago, your civilization should have ended. Your son betrayed you. Your homeworld burned. Everything you were, everything you built, everything you loved was turned to ash in a single generation. Grinther's eyes flickered. His claws scraped against his armored legs. "You are not supposed to know about that. Grief is hard to hide, even when you bury it under a century of war." She took another step forward. Ramon and Priya stayed back, letting her work, but their eyes never stopped scanning for threats. "Your people should be extinct," Okonkwo continued. "Instead, you are here. You built a fleet from nothing. You carved out territory. You fought the Kelvani to a standstill for 100 years. That is not defeat. That is the most successful survival story in galactic history. Survival is not victory. It is when extinction was the alternative." Grinther was silent. Behind him, the names of millions of dead watched from the walls. His people, his responsibility, his failure to protect. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "The Kelvani will seed 3 systems at the edge of the Reach Nebula. Empty worlds suitable for colonization. No strategic value. No catch. They do not want them. But your people could use them. Charity." The word dripped with contempt. Ramon spoke up, his voice calm despite the tension. "Not charity. Investment. The Kelvani have been fighting to hold what they have. They never considered that helping you survive might be cheaper than killing you. We do not need their help." Okonkwo shook her head. "With respect, High Warlord, that is not true. Your population has been declining for 50 years. Your birth rates cannot match your casualties. Your fleet is held together with salvage and desperation. You have been slowly dying since the day your son killed your world." She paused, letting the words settle. "The war gives you purpose. I understand that. When everything else is gone, fighting is the only thing left. But fighting without hope is just slower suicide." Grinther's claws dug into the armrests of his seat, leaving gouges in the metal. "Why do you care? You're not Kelvani. You're not Dorith. What does our war matter to your species?" Okonkwo thought of Earth, the rising seas, the dying forests, the desperate measures humanity had taken to survive on a planet that was slowly trying to kill them. "Because we know what it feels like to lose a homeworld," she said quietly. "Ours is still dying. We are still fighting to save it. But we learned something along the way that you have not. What? That survival requires more than war. It requires building something worth surviving for. Grinther stared at her for a long moment. Then he raised one massive hand and pointed toward the door. Leave. I will consider your words. High Warlord. I said leave. You have delivered your message. Now go, before I change my mind about letting you live. The escort appeared at the doorway, waiting to guide them back to their ship. Okonkwo held Grinther's gaze for one more heartbeat, then nodded and turned away. As they walked back through the corridors, Meridian leaned close. Did it work? I did not know, Okonkwo admitted. But he listened. That is more than anyone has achieved in 70 years. Behind them, in his chamber of names, the most feared warlord in the galaxy sat alone with the weight of 53 years of grief. And for the first time in decades, he wondered if there might be another way. Station Valetha's artificial sun began its first cycle since the humans had returned. Golden light spread across the defensive platforms, illuminating ships that had been holding position for decades. Nothing had changed. Nothing ever changed. Until today. Lieutenant Okonkwo stood in the war room, watching the tactical displays with Admiral Sorth. The Silent Promise had returned 6 hours ago. She had delivered her report. Now there was nothing to do but wait. He could attack, Sorth said. Full assault. Everything he has. We gave him our position, our weakness, our desperation. He could. Okonkwo agreed. You do not seem concerned. Concern changes nothing. Either it worked or it did not. We will know soon enough. The first sunrise passed without incident. Doroth forces held their positions. No movement, no communication. Just the eternal standoff that had defined this region of space for a century. Consul Meridian arrived with updates from intelligence. Doroth fleet patterns are unchanged. No signs of mobilization. No withdrawal. They are simply waiting. As are we, Okonkwo said. The second sunrise came. Priya reported something unusual in intercepted communications. The Doroth channels were flooded with encrypted traffic, but not tactical orders. Personal messages. Discussion. Arguments. Something is happening, she told Okonkwo. I cannot decrypt most of it, but the volume is unprecedented. They're talking to each other. Really talking. Debating. Ramon had spent the night analyzing the data from their visit to the command vessel. Grinther convened his war council. First time in 30 years. He is not deciding alone anymore. Sorth's crystalline form flickered with colors Okonkwo could not interpret. Is that good? It means he is uncertain. Uncertainty can go either way, but it is better than rigid certainty. Rigid certainty keeps wars going forever. The second night fell. Okonkwo did not sleep. She stood at a viewport, watching the endless dance of patrol ships and defensive platforms. Behind her, the war room hummed with quiet tension. Meridian joined her. How did you know? The consul asked. Know what? That they would listen. That Grinther would not simply kill you the moment you open your mouth. Okonkwo was silent for a moment. I did not know, but I knew that he had been fighting this war for 80 years. No one fights that long unless they are looking for something. Victory, meaning, purpose, or permission to stop. Permission. Sometimes people cannot end things on their own. They need someone from outside to tell them it is acceptable, that stopping does not mean they failed, that survival can be its own victory. Meridian considered this. Your species is very strange. We are. That is why we are still here. The third sunrise began. The tactical displays flickered. Alarms sounded across the station. Officers rushed to their positions, expecting the attack they had been bracing for. But the alarms were not warning of assault. They were registering something else entirely. Doroth ships were moving. Not forward, not into attack formation. They were withdrawing. 3 forward positions that the Doroth had held for decades were suddenly empty. Ships that had been stationed there for generations were pulling back, creating gaps in lines that had never wavered. What is happening? Sorth demanded. Priya worked her console frantically. Incoming transmission. Official Doroth diplomatic frequency. They're requesting to speak with. She paused, checking the translation. The small, soft ones who do not know when to be afraid. Okonkwo almost smiled. Put it through. High Warlord Grinthur's voice filled the war room, heavy with the weight of decades and the uncertainty of new possibilities. We do not accept your terms as offered, but we will discuss. The fighting will pause while discussions continue. Any violation of this pause by either side ends all negotiations permanently. Sorith stepped forward. High Warlord, this is Admiral Sorith. We accept your conditions for preliminary discussions. I do not negotiate with you, Admiral. I negotiate with the human. She understood what no one else bothered to learn. The channel closed. For a long moment, no one in the war room moved. A century of constant warfare had just paused. Not ended, not resolved, but paused, which was more than anyone had achieved in living memory. Consul Meridian turned to Okonkwo. 3 days, 112 years of war, and you changed everything in 3 days. Okonkwo shook her head. We did not change anything. The war was already over. The Dorith had been fighting because they did not know how to do anything else. All we did was offer them a different option. Admiral Sorith moved to stand beside her at the viewport. Outside, Kelvani and Dorith ships were passing each other without firing. For the first time in anyone's memory, the guns were silent. What you have done today, he said slowly, will be remembered for as long as our species exists. The humans who ended the century war. We did not end it. Okonkwo corrected gently. We just showed them it was already finished. They were grieving. They were exhausted. They were trapped in a pattern no one knew how to break. We gave them permission to stop. She watched the ships drift past each other, enemies who might someday become something else. That is what humans do, Admiral. We are not the strongest species. We are not the smartest. We are not the most advanced. But we have spent our entire history learning to recognize when someone is drowning. And sometimes, all drowning people need is someone to reach out a hand. The third sunrise continued its climb. Across the sector, soldiers on both sides were standing down from positions they had held for decades. The future was uncertain. Peace was not guaranteed. Everything could still fall apart. But for now, in this moment, the war was quiet. And 3 humans from a dying world had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten. Sometimes the greatest victory is helping your enemy survive.